Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking some pretty abstract sociological ideas about race, ethnicity, and inequality and, well, bringing them right down to earth. We're going to look at who actually holds power, how society categorizes us, and what exactly happens when bias gets built directly into our systems. Let's get right into it.
So what does it actually mean to be a minority in society? And how do sociologists even measure it? When you hear the word minority, it's incredibly tempting to just think about the math, right? But in sociology, even a numerical majority, like women or historically black South Africans during apartheid, can actually be considered a minority. It's not about the headcount. It's about leverage, agency, and who actually holds the reins of power in a community.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll define the minority experience. Then we'll unpack race and identity, contrast prejudice with discrimination, look at 4 major sociological perspectives, and finally, map out the spectrum of intergroup relations.
Okay, Section 1, Defining the Minority Experience through Wagley and Harris's Foundational Framework.
Way back in 1958, sociologists Wagley and Harris came up with this really interesting 5-part checklist. They defined a minority group based on a lack of power rather than just population numbers. First up, the group experiences a distinct power disadvantage compared to the dominant majority. Second, they possess distinct physical or cultural characteristics. Third, membership is involuntary. It's what sociologists call an ascribed status that you are literally born into. Fourth is solidarity. Members share a strong, undeniable sense of common interests and objectives. And fifth is in-group marriage, meaning they tend to marry within their own group, practicing what's known as an endogamy marriage system.
Moving on to Section 2, Unpacking Race and Identity, focusing on the social aspects of physical differentiation.
Building on that foundation, we really need to look at how society historically categorized race. If we look back, sociologists and anthropologists use groupings like Australoid, Negroid, which includes African American populations, Caucasian for white or European populations, Mongoloid for populations like Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, and Indo-Aryan peoples of South Asia. Now, these historical categories are crucial to understand because they illustrate how society has actively attempted to physically differentiate human beings based heavily on prevailing social aspects of the time.
Section 3, Prejudice versus Discrimination, the attitude versus the action.
This brings us to a massive, critical distinction: the internal psychology of bias versus the physical, on-the-ground reality of inequality. Look at the left side here. Prejudice is the thought. It's an irrational preconception or a narrow-minded judgment directed at a group without any just grounds. But on the right side, discrimination is the behavior. It's the active, tangible denial of opportunities, equal rights, and vital resources to specific groups.
Now, to really understand prejudice, we have to isolate a concept called ethnocentrism, because this serves as the bedrock for racism. Ethnocentrism is carrying a mentality that simply disapproves of other cultures purely because you assume your own is inherently superior. It's that mindset that looks at a foreign custom or language and instinctively judges it as wrong or backward. And when this ethnocentric mentality is actively applied under the assumption of racial supremacy, well, that becomes racism.
The source material also highlights a much more subtle concept: colorblind racism. This is a complex dynamic where people assert a stance of racial neutrality. Basically, by claiming that everyone has equal opportunities right now, this mindset attempts to be neutral, but it often completely ignores the historical and systemic inequalities that prevent true equality from existing in practice.
So, we've looked at the individual mindset, but we have to ask the big question. What happens when discrimination is built directly into the system? What occurs when these denials scale all the way up to the macro level?
That brings us to institutional discrimination. This is where systemic barriers are built right into society's daily operations, tangibly restricting access to things like jobs, healthcare, and fair housing. We aren't talking about personal bias anymore. This is when the employment sectors, healthcare systems, and government operations naturally disadvantage certain identities. For example, in housing, this can manifest as systemic refusals to rent to African, Latin, or Asian individuals. It's structural and it is deeply rooted. This isn't just about one bad actor, it's about the invisible architecture around us every single day. Think about your own community for a second, and the systems you navigate.
All right, Section 4, 4 sociological perspectives, viewing inequality through different lenses.
To figure out why these institutional barriers stubbornly persist, sociologists use 4 distinct theoretical models. You can see them here in this matrix. We have the functionalist approach, conflict theory, labeling theory, and the interactionist perspective. Each of these gives us a totally different lens to explain why racial and ethnic dynamics operate the way they do, ranging from macro-level economics all the way down to micro-level behaviors. Let's contrast the macro theories first. On the left, Arnold Rose's functionalist model argues that discrimination literally limits our search for talent. It's a massive waste of resources. It increases poverty and crime because society basically fails to use the abilities of all individuals. The solution? Full participation. A great example of this is the organization BRAC, which actively counteracts this by hiring globally across its network to harness diverse talent. But on the right, Karl Marx's conflict theory views inequality strictly as economic exploitation. Capitalists control wages, forcing minorities to accept less. This secures cheap labor and maintains the ruling class's power.
Now moving down to the micro level, labeling theory examines how authorities arbitrarily profile groups based on race or national origin. For example, falsely assuming a certain nationality is automatically involved in drug trafficking or forgery. It's all about how the label defines the treatment. Meanwhile, the interactionist perspective gives us a much more optimistic view, zooming all the way into person-to-person contact. It argues that when you put people in interracial connections and cooperative teamwork within an industry, it actively reduces tension and breaks down those harmful stereotypes. It's amazing how working together can literally change minds.
Finally, Section 5. The spectrum of relations, from separation to acceptance.
Let's look at the actual societal structures that emerge from all these dynamics. This spectrum tracks the progression of a society, moving from the severe hostility of segregation through amalgamation and assimilation all the way at pluralism. Segregation is the strict, distinct separation of people, like different schools, restaurants, and living areas. Moving along, we see amalgamation, which is forming entirely new groups through intermarriage, though communities sometimes show less interest in this. Then there's assimilation, where a minority group basically sheds its own identity to become part of the major culture.
But then we hit pluralism at the far end of the spectrum. Pluralism represents a structural model where distinct identities are mutually respected rather than erased. In a truly pluralistic society, groups don't have to assimilate or amalgamate just to be accepted. Their various cultures and unique group identities are fundamentally respected and acknowledged as valuable, essential threads in the overall societal fabric.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought to help you analyze the social frameworks operating in your own daily life. If our societal structures move across this spectrum, where does our current system truly sit? Are you seeing your community through a functionalist lens, hoping for full participation? Do you see the economic friction of conflict theory? And most importantly, when you look at that spectrum of relations, are we truly marching toward pluralism, or are we stuck somewhere in between? Take a moment to really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these vital sociological concepts. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep learning.